And good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back. It has been an incredible conference so far. We are at the end of day 3 of the Spectrum Conference, our last session of the day. We have had incredible sessions today. We've also had some national news that has come out today, actually during one of our sessions, and it's great to be back with you. I'm Joe Storch. I use he and him. I'm an associate counsel in the SUNY Office of General Counsel, and I'm so pleased to be back with you with a couple of brief reminders before I introduce Elizabeth Tang and Elizabeth introduces Nathaniel. We have closed captioned. You can turn closed captioning on using the Zoom controls at the bottom of your screen. We also encourage you to use the hashtag SUNY Spectrum in sharing on social media, and we will feature some of those posts on our social media wall. We also encourage you to be involved through the workplace through Facebook group. And if you have not been able to join that, please send an email to spectrum@suny.edu. We will be happy to add you to that. We have 2 more days of great content for you beginning tomorrow in mid-morning on the East Coast, and then again on Friday. It is my great pleasure at this point to introduce a great colleague, Elizabeth Tang. Elizabeth is from the National Women's, there you are, okay, the NWLC, does a tremendous amount of work in this area, very thoughtful work and advocacy on behalf of students at the K-12 and higher ed level, as well as society in general. Elizabeth is going to introduce Nathaniel and start the session. So without any further ado, I wish everyone a great session, and I will turn it over to Elizabeth.
Thank you so much, Joe. I'm really excited to be here. As Joe mentioned, my name is Elizabeth. My pronouns are she, her. I'm an education civil rights attorney at the National Women's Law Center in DC. And I'm really excited to be facilitating today's session with Nathaniel Gray. Nathaniel, I'll tell you a little bit about him. Nathaniel holds a BFA in musical theater from Pace University and graduated with honors. And his MSW from Fordham University, where he received the Clare Award for Excellence and graduated with honors. Nathaniel's focus has been on homeless LGBTQ youth in New York City, working for the Hetrick Martin Institute and the Ali Forney Center in Direct Practice, Policy Design, and Grant Writing. Nathaniel is also the founder of The Proud Path, an educational tool for parents of queer youth, and provided queer competency training for teachers and social workers at nonprofits like Big Brothers Big Sisters of New York City, as well as at several public and private schools. For that work, Nathaniel was honored to receive the 2018 New York Nonprofit Media 40 Under 40 Award. Nathaniel is also a part of the Anti-Defamation League's cadre of anti-bias trainers and has delivered the Anti-Defamation League's peer training program to students across the state of New York. Nathaniel's dedication is to address the disproportionate rates of homelessness and suicide in queer youth through inclusive and affirming policy design. So with all of that, I will now turn it over to Nathaniel.
Thank you so much. Hi, everybody. I'm very excited to be here. I'm just going to get my presentation ready to go. And let me know, anyone, if that's not looking correct, but I think we're going to get started. I'm very excited to be here. So let me just give you a little more info on me and who I am. My name is Nathaniel. I come to this work with a very interesting lens. My parents were both in the Marine Corps. I was raised in a small 4,000 person town in Southern Ohio in a Bible Baptist community. So my experience growing up has really informed a lot of the work that I now do to try and create environments that are as affirming as possible for LGBTQ young people. I moved to New York City after high school, got my degree in musical theater, did theater, and really loved that life. I was also a full-time professional drag queen. That's a real thing. And performing 4 or 5 days a week was a great time. As Elizabeth mentioned, I have my master's degree in social work and worked exclusively with homeless or marginally housed LGBTQ young people in New York City. And currently, I have my business, The Proud Path, and I also am very grateful to get to inform policy for LGBTQ youth and systems of care for the state as well. So this could get uncomfortable, and that is okay. All right, so I love that people have been talking about their pronouns. My pronouns are he, him, and his. We will discuss what that means if that's not something you're familiar with. We're going to be talking about gender and sex, and that gets people squirrely sometimes, which is okay. You know, I just want to acknowledge that that's going to happen. We're talking about sexual orientation, and then just a trigger warning for those of you out there watching who may have history of your own trauma. I'm going to be talking a lot about depression, anxiety, suicide, assault, homelessness, and trafficking in some of the research portions of the presentation today. Also, it's really important to remember, if you are LGBTQ and you're watching this, it could potentially be triggering to you, hearing the things that we're going to talk about. I certainly am not the only mouthpiece for the LGBTQ community. No one speaks for their whole community. And it's important that we appreciate the intent of people who are asking questions or have thoughts to offer. We have to be accountable for the things that we say. We should assess our positionality. And what I mean by that is just being aware of our own relationship to privilege. It's just important to be aware of. And finally, that LGBTQ identities are intrinsically very personal things. And so it can be difficult to talk about, and not all people are going to be comfortable sharing. Let's go over some objectives. All right, so today we're going to have a review of language and LGBTQ identities. We're going to talk a little bit about what the research says around LGBTQ youth. We're going to talk about what it even means to be affirming. What does that look like? And then within what affirming looks like, we're going to talk about silent ways of doing that and different types of language that's affirming. So I am a big fan of making sure that everyone's on the same page with language, with dialogue, so that the terms and definitions I use aren't being missed or going over anyone's head, and we all have the same language that you can speak from. So, you know, the first 5 are usually pretty clear. People know: lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and then queer. So I'll talk about the word queer and why that's being used today in just a few minutes. But just to go back to the beginning, a lesbian is someone who identifies as a woman attracted to women. Gay can both be specifically to men who are attracted to other men, but also can be the term for same-sex attraction in general. Bisexual, as a term, historically meant you're attracted to men and women, but as we've expanded our understanding of gender, people are using bisexual in a much more expansive way. And also there's the term pansexual, which is really used to mean that you are attracted to people, not necessarily the parts that they come along with. A phrase that they use that I think is wonderful is literally hearts, not parts. Within transgender, we're seeing the terms gender nonconforming, non-binary more. We're talking about sort of living outside of the binary, or a third gender or multiple gender option. So it's important to just be aware that those terms are being used. Questioning, anytime we're talking about teenagers especially, but any LGBTQ person, we go through a phase of questioning before we're certain of our identity. It's when we're asking ourselves, you know, I'll say for me personally, asking myself like, oh, am I really attracted to guys? Like, that's who I am. And I had to start doing some deep personal investigative work to figure that out. So that's sort of what that term means. And it's a bridge that all LGBTQ people end up crossing at some point. Intersex is a term that is being included more and more, and I'm glad that it is. It is the term that is currently in use that replace the derogatory term hermaphrodite, which is the word that was in use for a long time. We're talking about, people who are born with both male and female reproductive anatomy. That can look like a lot of different ways. It also can be a combination of hormones or chromosomes that are unexpected or different than what we would see in a stereotypical assigned male or assigned female at birth body. And it's also included because it's been common practice for a long time, and fortunately is being erased from common practice, but it has been to perform surgery on newborns, on infants who have just been born and their bodies don't align with what science might say is a male or female body based on anatomy and chromosomes, and the families and doctors choose essentially at birth what that child's body will grow into, and there's often a surgery that accompanies that. And of course that can cause many different problems, but first and foremost it's an invasion of that infant's rights to their own body. So it's important to keep them included in this conversation. The A category can be asexual, aromantic, agender. A at the beginning of anything really means that it is without that thing or outside of that thing. So an asexual person doesn't necessarily have sexual attraction to other people. A romantic person might not find romantic attraction with other people. And someone who's agender might identify themselves as outside of the binary or without having a gender at all. And then two-spirit. Really important term to know, especially in a state that has a very large Indigenous population. Two-spirit is a term that comes out of the Indigenous community. It is also a term that should be used by people from the Indigenous community, just to be aware. But within their culture, there are many beliefs, and one part of those belief systems are that people are born with a masculine or a feminine spirit energy, and that some people are two-spirit because they have more than just masculine or feminine energy present. Again, it's a term from their community and should be used by people from their community. So let's get into pronouns. I will also say that there's going to be a couple of points throughout this for question and answer. Elizabeth is so helpful and wonderful. She'll be fielding some of those things and making sure that we get any questions in so we can chat about them and get them clarified. So if anything I'm saying is confusing or needs further explanation, feel free to reach out. So pronouns, you may have noticed that many of us introduced ourselves with our pronouns. We have them listed next to our names in the Zoom window. So common pronouns to be aware of: they, them, and their, she, her, and hers, and he, him, and his. And so first of all, to take us all back to sixth grade English, what's a pronoun? We're talking about the word that you use instead of someone's name, especially when you're talking about them and they're not in the room. So for example, after this whole thing is over, you might say, wow, that guy with purple hair was wild on that call, or he was really boring, or whatever it is you're gonna say, but you're gonna say he because I have it next to my name that I use he, him, his pronouns, and that's how I identify. And so some people may not look like the pronouns they choose and that they identify with. And it's important that we listen to when people identify pronouns so that we're being respectful in the way we're speaking about them when they're not in the room. A common, just one thing to note, there's a category called zim zier or zim here. There are many different variations on it. This is sort of a third-party pronoun that comes from other languages that some people also identify with. It tends to imply that it's a pronoun outside of the binary, outside of he or she. And I have a little asterisk there next to they, them, their, because oftentimes there's confusion or difficulty understanding because people think of they, understandably, as a pronoun that only refers to multiple people. However, in the dictionary now, I think Merriam-Webster, it's officially considered to be a singular pronoun. But I would also point out there are a lot of times that we do that without realizing it. So for example, if I were to, if we were in person at a conference room and every one of you left the room and suddenly there was a cell phone laying on a table and no one else was around, I would pick it up and go, wow, I think someone left their phone. They must have walked out without it. I wonder if they could be reached by doing a loudspeaker announcement, right? I've specified a single person that whole time, but I have done so with the word they because I don't know their gender identity, and we don't do that to people. We offer a they pronoun in those situations. All right.
Nathaniel, I'm going to jump in really quickly. We already have our first question from Adam, and it's about that slide. So, and others may also have the same question. So just wanted to get an answer before we move on.
Yep.
And the question is, how are we distinguishing between agender and non-binary?
Thank you. That's an excellent question. I would say anytime that we're talking about these categories, be aware that everyone has their own relationship to these definitions, everybody. And so I think in this specific question you're asking, people will say that they either identify as non-binary or they identify as agender. And to be honest, there are times when that could mean the same thing to somebody, if that's how they personally identify it. So I would just say, it's important to roll with whatever they are telling you, especially if you're working with a client. The best advice I was ever given was to just get to know the person sitting in front of you. And so, you know, the way I've described agender or non-binary might be different than how somebody that actually walks that walk or lives that life defines it for themselves. And so in those situations, it's important that we allow them the opportunity to define it themselves. So I hope that was a helpful answer, but they could mean similar things potentially. All right. Thank you for tossing questions out there though. I love it. That's what we're here for. So some additional terms that you're going to hear me say and other people say in general in this work that are important to know. So let's cut to the chase, the word queer. I will start off by saying that's a word that I personally use very interchangeably to mean LGBTQ. So for example, if I'm talking about everybody in the LGBTQ community, I might say everyone in the queer community. So that's one way in which it's being used currently. Another way that it could be used is there are some people who identify with multiple facets of being LGBTQ. I'm not transgender, I am gay. However, it's possible to be both transgender and gay. It's possible to be agender and asexual. It's possible to be a lot of things. And so some people, rather than explaining both their gender identity and their sexual orientation in detail, they might just choose to say they identify as queer. And if they want you to know more about their identity, then they will tell you. But it's important to just take them at face value and they say that and acknowledge that perhaps it means that they have multiple identities, or that can also just be how someone identifies as a part of the community. Lastly, and most importantly, it is never a noun. And so let's go back to 6th grade English. And what do I mean by that? What I mean is, when you're talking about this work, you're talking about the queer curriculum or community. We're talking about queer equity and culture, right? But the word queer is being used as an adjective in those situations. It's describing something else. So this is a queer training, right? The training is about queer cultural competency. What the word queer should never be is a noun. And that means when you're saying, oh, that person is a queer. That just doesn't sound right, you know, and it doesn't feel right. And I think it harkens back to a time that we all know of when that word was only a derogatory term for our community. So just being aware that if you're going to use it, that's totally fine, but that it should always be an adjective describing something, the LGBTQ community, the queer community, a queer person, and not just a noun. Cisgender can be a very confusing term, but it's actually quite simple. If you're hearing me talk right now and you do not identify as transgender, you are cisgender. I am cisgender. What it means is the sex that you were assigned at birth, and that's sort of the phrasing that we use. So for example, I was assigned male at birth based on my anatomy. And to be even more simple than that, it's based on what the doctor sees between your legs or doesn't see between your legs when you are born that defines that. And so if you are born like I was, assigned male at birth and identify as male, meaning that I'm not transgender, then I am cisgender. And just to sort of give you a little background, it wasn't just to sort of throw another term out there. It was because even in medical writing and social science writing, the word transgender for a while was a category that the other category was normal. So we were describing normal people and transgender people. And I think that we all understand how that is problematic. And so transgender means crossing gender. And so cisgender means same gender. So it means that you haven't crossed from one side to the other, as it were. Misgendering is when you're intentionally and consistently misusing a pronoun. So for example, I have said my pronouns are he, him, and his. Elizabeth Tang said her pronouns are she, her, and hers. If someone consistently is talking about them and misgendering them, meaning they're using the wrong pronoun, and even after they're corrected, they continue to do it. So I'm just really making sure we understand it's typically like a bit malicious, it's a bit intentional, then that is misgendering. Similarly, if you're speaking to someone who has changed their name to a name that they identify with now, if you are using the name that they were given at birth, whether you're their parent or you're a school official or a doctor, if you're using that name, again, in the same fashion as misgendering, intentionally, after they've asked you to stop using that name, in the community, it's called dead naming. And I will just say that in New York State, in the Division of Human Rights, dead naming and misgendering, when done consistently, when done in spaces that are protected by anti-discrimination laws, can be considered forms of discrimination because you're not honoring the person's chosen name or pronouns. And on a deeper, more personal note, LGBTQ youth especially that you might work with, that I've worked with, research has been done and transgender youth feel the same trauma when someone misgenders or dead names them that they have felt when they've been physically or sexually assaulted by somebody. It's a very triggering experience. Again, it's not when we make a mistake, oops, I'm sorry, and we'll talk about what we do in those situations. It's when we're being intentional and forceful about using the wrong name or pronoun. Okay, so who do LGBTQ people come out to? Who do queer people come out to? If we were in a big room, I'd ask people to start shouting things out. Oftentimes, the first person we think of is our parent, right? Like you come out to your mom or your dad, you come out to your best friend, you come out to a sibling, you come out to a teacher at school that you really trust. Well, once you get to the point where you've come out to all the people you know, you continue to meet new people for the rest of your life. And so the reality is, we come out every day for the rest of our lives. When I talk about having a husband, if somebody finds out about the work that I do, if I'm holding my husband's hand in the mall, people instantly know that I identify as LGBTQ. If somebody tells you that they use they, them pronouns, they're coming out as someone who identifies not with male or female pronouns, right? We are constantly coming out. And it can be exhausting. And especially when you're working with young people, being aware that, you know, the population I've worked the most with are like 12 to 21-year-olds. I think we could all agree that that is a really difficult time in life in general. I've never met a person who says, yeah, I would love to go back to 7th grade and redo that again. Like, it's not fun. And so not only are these young people going through that, but they're also constantly questioning their identity and then potentially being seen and coming out all the time to people. And it can be really daunting. So just being aware of that is really important in mitigating sort of additional stress to LGBTQ young people. This slide, I want to go over it briefly, but I don't want to get too lost in the weeds. One of the important things to know is that it's not just LGBTQ people who have a sexual orientation or LGBTQ people who have a gender identity. In reality, everyone who's on this call right now, everyone who's watching the recording later tomorrow, whenever you're watching it, you know, everyone everywhere has all of these identities. We have a gender identity, a gender expression. We are assigned a sex at birth. We are physically attracted to people, and we are emotionally attracted to people. It's just important that we are all maintaining awareness around the fact that it's not just LGBTQ people who live on these spectrum. And so what you could do right now is just take a moment and take a look at this chart. Okay, so gender identity, as you can see, is the little symbol that's attached to the thought bubble for the unicorn there. It means gender identity is something that develops in the brain. Gender identity actually develops between the ages of 2 and 4 years old. If anyone has ever raised a child or been around small children, you know that between 2 and 4, kids are constantly talking about gender. Is daddy a boy? Is mommy a boy? Am I a girl? Is sister a boy? And they're asking these questions because they are developing their sense of gender identity. It's also an important age to think about because if that's when gender identity is being expressed and that gender identity is not the same or aligned with the sex that they were assigned at birth. So let's say, for example, I'll use myself. Let's say I'm assigned male at birth, and at 2.5 years old, I consistently keep telling my family that I am a girl. And I'm doing it from 2, 3, 4 years old, 10 years old. That is an identity that is developed and is in the brain. And when you work with those kids, and if anyone has worked with those kids, you'll know the phrase that I have heard throughout my experience in this business is consistent, insistent, persistent. So 2 to 4 years old, these kids are consistently, persistently insisting that they are the gender identity that they are. So that, again, develops in the brain. That's separate from developing from what your body is assigned at birth, where you see that middle row there. That's directly related to your physical anatomy. That is not tethered to your mental gender identity. Gender expression, if you look at the little green dots, you'll see that that sort of lives outside of the body. So my perfect example for gender expression is everyone knows that outfit or that shirt or that pair of pants or those shoes that they love to wear, right? You walk over to your closet, you open the doors up, you look and you're like, oh, I'm gonna wear that outfit, that perfect outfit that I love how I look. That's your expression, right? That means that there's something inside of you that clicks with that look, that clicks with the way that you look when you're wearing those clothes or that outfit. And that's how you're telling the world part of what your identity is. That's how you're showing the world who you are and what your comfort is with who you are. So gender expression, everyone has that. And it changes with times. It even changes with the minute. I often bring up that as someone who's a former drag queen, I identify as male and I'm a cisgender male. I would wear clothes like this all day and do whatever I was doing and then get ready for a show. And to get ready for that, I was shaving my beard. I was putting on makeup, putting on a wig, putting on clothes, women's clothes. I was changing my gender expression to be very feminine. But then for me, when the show was over, I took everything off and went back to a more masculine gender expression. It's incredibly fluid. And if you think about it with time, you know, anyone who identifies as a woman wearing pants today would have been treated very differently wearing pants 200 years ago. So it changes over time what we expect of gender expression, but we each have our own relationship to it. It's important to remember that. And then when it comes to attraction, we all have the the way that our heart is attracted to people is our own individual experience. So what we look at when we see somebody and who we are attracted to, either sexually or romantically, we each have our own relationship to that. And those things are constantly developing. And so it's important to just know that within all of these categories, everybody operates on these different spectrum, not just LGBTQ people. So before we get to this, I just want to check in and see if we've got any questions.
Yeah, we actually do. So one question we have is, do you think as we continue to become more inclusive and become more educated with the LGBTQ plus community, do you think that coming out will always be a thing people have to do?
That's an amazing question. And I will answer it with a brief story of why I do this work. I am a proud New York City person now. I've been a New York City dweller for 17 years, which is wild. And I used to babysit for a family in Park Slope. For those of you who don't know, Park Slope is the sort of become like the mom and dad community of Brooklyn near the park. Lots of kids on scooters racing around, lots of soccer mom, soccer dad, play date, all of it. And one of the families I used to babysit for, the son had a lot of behavior stuff going on that reminded me of myself at his age. Not necessarily effeminate behavior, although he and I did both have effeminate childhood behavior, but some of the more emotional things about him, the way he was connecting with people, the tensions he felt around other boys in school, that I had a great, candid conversation with his mom about the fact that he might be LGBTQ. And she said, oh yeah, my husband and I have talked about that. We're fully supportive. We've thought about it. And so I was excited and happy that he had that support intrinsically built in. And then I kept thinking about it. And I kept thinking about the fact that his parents could say, we accept and love LGBTQ people. Your babysitters is LGBTQ. Our neighbors downstairs are a lesbian couple. We fully support that. The reality is that kid still grows up in a society that is incredibly binary, that is heteronormative, meaning there is a presumption that everyone is straight until proven gay. That is cis-normative, so everyone assumes that everyone else is cisgender as opposed to transgender. And so we have this culture and this environment that even if we got to a place where every right, every freedom, everything was available, and it was known from birth that was available and everything was supportive, we still have to come out to ourselves first. I had to realize I was LGBTQ first. And then you still, even though you know people are going to accept you and love you and support you, you still have to say it out loud. And so I think that we can get really far. We can get to a place where, especially as I talk in the later slides about mental health of LGBTQ young people, I think we're going to get to a much better place with all of that. But I think that it's important to recognize that, you know, when in my work with parents who have LGBTQ kids, I've worked with a mom actually whose daughter, we were talking about her daughter who identified as gay, not as transgender. And she was saying, yeah, I would support it if my daughter came out even as being trans and I identified it as a boy. And so I said, okay, well, as a thought experiment, let's really dig into that. So let's say your daughter, and it was her only child, is a boy now. Did you have any expectations of having a daughter that meant that you were excited about having a daughter? Were you expecting her to be walked down the aisle by her dad, for her to come home and be excited about maybe getting pregnant and having a kid and wanting to talk about it? Even just like the little things like mother-daughter activities. Are you comfortable with all of those changing? And she said, no. I have to acknowledge it would be really sad for me if I didn't have a daughter anymore. Even though I would support a son in a heartbeat, it would still be sad. So I think to answer your question, there will always be these desires and feelings and thoughts and assumptions that we have in our culture. And that means that kids will always have to come out, unfortunately, in my personal opinion. Any others before I jump into the next thing? All right, I'll take that as a no. So here's what we're gonna do. We are going to do what I like to call a memory walk. But before we get to that, we're gonna close our eyes and exhale. And I know this is gonna get really yoga hippie. It's great. Trust me, okay? Close your eyes, exhale. Inhale. Exhale. Inhale. Exhale. You're all gonna do one last one. Inhale. And exhale. Okay, with your eyes closed, I want you to think back to the first crush you ever had. What grade were you in? Where were you sitting in school? How did you feel? Was your heart racing? Did you see that kid across the room and think, wow, I want to go out with them? You know, and usually at that age, we don't even know what going out is yet, but we want to. Who is that person for you? Can you envision their face? Can you see their name or where they were sitting? And then what did you do? Did you write a note like we often did that says, will you go out with me? Circle yes, no, maybe. And then fold it all up and hide it in their desk or sneak it into their backpack? Or did you go the more roundabout way where you go out into the playground and you tell your friend, who you hope tells another friend and another friend and another friend and another friend, till it gets to their friend, and then their friend tells them that you have a crush on them? Or were you bold at such a young age and you walked right over and said, I think you're cute and we should go out. My name is Nate. How did you choose to interact with that person? And then if you did start dating somebody at that age, like what did that even look like to you? What did dating mean to you at that time? Did you tell your parents? Or were your parents asking, you know, when you got home, your parents said like, oh, are there any boys in school you think are cute? Any girls in school you think are cute? And then did you have, you know, that typical crazy breakup, 6th, 7th grade, 8th grade breakups, emotional heartbreak, storming out of the dance, or even the other side of the coin, the awkward, swaying back and forth at the 7th grade homecoming that is so uncomfortable and sweaty hands everywhere. And then how about high school? So who did you have a crush on in high school? Who did you go to your homecoming dance with if you went to your homecoming dance? Did your parents take photos? Are you embarrassed of those photos still today, as many of us are? Did you do the limo thing and a corsage? What color was your dress? Did you rent a tuxedo? And then did dating in high school take on something a little more serious for you? It often does. People start thinking about, you know, if I married this person, my last name would change. If I really love them, maybe we're gonna have kids. Am I gonna have kids with this person that I love so much? And then when we have breakups at that time too, they are immense. They are profound breakups. They are very difficult. Emotions run high. And maybe even into college with this person, who are you dating then that you're thinking like, ooh, I'm gonna have kids. We're gonna have kids together. How many kids do we want to have? What are their names gonna be? And you start thinking in these terms of the rest of your life and these relationships that you have that are going to affect you for the rest of your life. Who are all those people? What were all those memories like? And can you see from what I've just described how really without any written rules, without any intentional structure around it, society raised you to understand how to be a fully functional adult that is in relationships, that has, you learn about forms of breaking up and getting back together. You learned how to navigate those skills within a relationship in young ages at times that it's not quite so dire and severe. And so can you see how that has happened for you somehow? And then if you open your eyes, I want you to know, I don't have any of those memories. I can tell you most LGBTQ people don't have any of those memories. Even kids who grow up in an era now, in an environment where they feel comfortable coming out right away and talking about it, and they even have other kids in school that they can date, it's still very different. Being the one gay boy in my grade who would have dated the only other gay boy in my grade isn't exactly the same as being a kid who's attracted to what is half of the student population. So LGBTQ people, unfortunately, don't often have any of those experiences in their background to draw from. And it affects us greatly. And it can often feel like we're making up for lost time. Some LGBTQ young people make really dangerous decisions to get those experiences. But we're missing that. And so I think, we're going to open up Q&A quickly to see what else you guys have out there. But I would just ask you to think about, when you think about those memories, what comes up for you? What are those cornerstone moments in your development that you would have lost if you were not if you were LGBTQ, or you might have lost? Think about how it might affect a queer person's life to not have those, to just have them missing. And then, any other questions that come up, I am happy to answer them for this section. So I will turn it over to Elizabeth.
Thank you, Nathaniel. It looks like we don't have any questions right now in the queue, probably because we've answered some of them along the way. Yeah. But folks, definitely feel free to keep sending us questions. We are very, very happy to answer them.
Awesome. Great. So I will move into the next section. We're going to talk about research. And I have to tell you, I don't know when I became this person. I used to be so cool, but now I love research. My particular area of interest, obviously, is LGBTQ young people. And what we're going to talk about over these next slides, this is getting into the stuff that I had mentioned earlier, could be a trigger warning. We're going to talk about depression, anxiety, suicide, as well as other negative experiences that LGBTQ young people may have, just being aware of that. So I think the most profound and important aspect of an LGBTQ young person's life is whether or not the people in their community, the people within their family, the friends they have, the teachers they have, whether they affirm and accept them or whether they reject them. And I would imagine you all understand what I mean by that, but when it comes to affirming and accepting, it could be as simple as saying, okay, you're saying that you don't identify with the word girl and you identify as a boy and you want me to say he, him pronouns and you want me to call you Alex now, I can do that. I will do that for you because I love you and I care about you and I affirm you. And we'll talk later about more ways in which we can be affirming, but I just wanted to paint that picture. So that is really wonderful and supportive for LGBTQ kids. And anything that's less than that gets into the territory of rejection. And that could be ignoring an LGBTQ kid's identity altogether, or it could be going as far as saying, no, you do not identify that way. I do not want you in my house. I'm not gonna call you that. Right. And so all the things that I'm about to discuss, the negative research and the unfortunate trajectory that LGBTQ kids face is really, I'm speaking about when they are openly rejected by their families and by the people in their life. it's incredibly powerful, whether or not someone affirms or rejects their child. So, as you can imagine, LGBTQ young people face bullying in general, and higher rates of school bullying. There's an excellent organization called GLSEN. You can see bottom left there, it's GLSEN, the Gay, Lesbian, Straight Education Network. They've done research for almost 20 years in in public schools across the country to identify the experiences that LGBTQ kids face in schools. So, according to their research, almost 60% of students who are LGBTQ feel unsafe at school. 75% of those kids avoid school functions, so that homecoming or prom, the dance, the football game, those different places where you might have had those touchstone memories from your childhood, LGBTQ kids, three out of 4 of them aren't going. 71% of students have heard anti-LGBTQ remarks from school staff. I just want to say again, that's not a typo, from school staff. And I will raise my hand and say that I also heard and received anti-LGBTQ things from my own personal experience in public school, from school staff. So outside of the school, the rejection that LGBTQ kids face in school, when they're rejected by their families, they are more likely to be in a system of care. And by system of care, I mean either foster care, juvenile justice, or a runaway homeless youth shelter. So these would all be young people up to age, in New York State, up to age 24 or 21, depending on where you are. So nationally, and there's no perfect sample, but the consensus is that LGBTQ people make up about 8% of the population. So 20%, 1 in 5 of the kids in the foster care system in our country, again, based on research, national research, identify as LGBTQ. So we're more than twice represented in the foster care system. That's the same number for our juvenile justice system as well. 1 in 5 kids are identifying as LGBTQ in these juvenile justice settings. Before I jump into the runaway homeless number, I will just say that those numbers are in large part because of LGBTQ identity. So an LGBTQ kid may come out and their family doesn't accept that and they abuse them. They would enter the foster care system. Their family doesn't accept that and the kid runs away because they don't want to be in an environment that feels like that. They might enter foster care, or if they're old enough, they may go directly to a runaway homeless shelter. As you can see above, LGBTQ kids may avoid school and school functions because of bullying or harassment they're experiencing. Well, across the country, there are many youth who are placed in juvenile justice settings or environments because of persistent and continued school truancy. But they may be skipping school to avoid the bullying and trauma that they're trying to not experience while they're just learning. And so there are behaviors that LGBTQ youth may take, like running away or skipping school, that we in our systems of care as a society have used to put them in a place like foster care or juvenile justice. And then we're going to talk about the number of youth in runaway and homeless systems that identify as LGBTQ. Sadly, it is 40%. 5 times the number of youth that identify as LGBTQ are represented in runaway homeless youth shelters. We make up 8%, and we are almost half of that population. I could speak for days and days and days about this population. It is dear and near to my heart. My email is at the end. If anyone has specific questions about this population, I'm happy to entertain them and discuss them. But just be aware that their experience is very difficult. So we're going to get into what some of those risks are that come along with that experience.
Nathaniel, I'm going to jump in again one more time. Apologies. We have a question. Can you say a little bit more about how LGBTQIA youth are winding up in the foster system?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. So I'm even though I do work for the state Office of Children and Family Services, I just want to give a disclaimer that these opinions and everything I'm about to say are my own. And I'm not going to talk about anything that's specific to any cases. But I can give you sort of a general impression. So for example, it's unfortunately fairly commonplace for parents to not want their child to be transgender. And that might be because of their own personal bias. It could be because of a religious holding they have within their family. It could be a cultural part of their community that they were raised in. But for whatever reason, there are parents who do not want that for their child. And so sometimes that child experiences rejection within the home. They may experience abuse. They may experience bullying. And I hate talking about it, but there's a common, unfortunately commonplace behavior that happens sometimes when LGBTQ kids come out, especially if they're in their tweens or younger, where an adult, a bad adult, obviously not a healthy parental adult, but an adult chooses to assault that child. So maybe we'll use me as an example again. If I was 13 years old and I said to my dad that I identified as gay, unfortunately, there's case example out there of adult males who then sexually assault that child, and it's their own, they're taking out their own maybe sexual fantasies or thoughts on that child, but they're doing it to that child because they say that they identify as LGBTQ. And that is actually why that number, the physical and sexual assault, is on this slide, because there is a prevalence of sexual assault when kids come out as LGBTQ. They might enter the foster care system because they are physically accosted. If a parent comes into the house and they see their little girl that they think is their little girl has shaved all of her hair off and is wearing dad's clothes, or a little boy that they see as a little boy is wearing mom's shoes and makeup, they might corporally punish that child and physically beat them because of their anger at that situation. Those things are called in to the SCR, those behaviors, the State Central Registry. Those behaviors are abuse and neglect by the parents. There can also be neglect in the sense that parents just stop caring about the child that identifies as LGBTQ, or the child runs away and is under the age of 16, which is the age you need to be before you're allowed to emancipate yourself and be in a shelter system somewhere, if that's what you want. And then the parents don't care. They don't track you down. You're a 12-year-old who ran away. The parents don't report it. In that situation, that's negligence. So the child, once found, would be put into the foster care system. So there are a lot of different reasons that an LGBTQ identity might cause an adult to act in a bad way that pushes the child into the system. And I hope that helped or clarified or answered your question. Anything else?
We have one other question. It might be answered later on, but the question is, how would I assist youth who have trauma and are in systems of care and identify with the LGBTQ community? Also, how to help staff be competent and culturally sensitive to youth who are coming out or has already expressed their sexuality?
Awesome. Great questions. And Elizabeth is absolutely right. We're going to get to that. So the last section of this is really going to be talking about how we affirm and what that means and why it's important. All right, so thanks for the questions, and we will get there, I promise. So again, back to the research, physical and sexual assault that LGBTQ youth face. 32% of LGBTQ homeless youth have experienced physical, emotional, or sexual abuse at home. Drug and alcohol use and abuse is very high for LGBTQ youth. Lesbian and gay youth are more than twice as likely to abuse drugs or alcohol. Bisexual youth are 3 times as likely. And this always surprises me when I know this to be true. Questioning youth. So that population I mentioned toward the beginning, that we all go through that. All LGBTQ people go through a phase of assessing our own identity. Questioning youth are 5 times as likely to abuse drugs and alcohol. Transgender youth are 2.5 times more likely to use meth and cocaine, street drugs. And there's a reason for that. The reason for that is because transgender youth are homeless more often than their LGBT counterparts, right? So we're talking sexual orientation, like I identify as gay, so that's a sexual orientation. I am not transgender, that's a gender identity. Youth who have a gender identity that is not aligned with their sex assigned at birth, youth who are transgender, are more likely to be homeless, and they're also more likely to participate in the street economy. The street economy, for those who don't know, is essentially a term for all the transactions that happen when someone is actively street homeless and they're looking for resources, but not from places like shelters and like shelters and food banks, but rather by transactional sex, so prostitution. LGBTQ young people who are homeless are 7 times more likely to engage in survival sex. Survival sex means that they are trading sex for the opportunity to have a bed to sleep in, for a meal to eat, for warmth, for clothing, for some basic necessity that they have. LGBTQ youth in the street economy are trading that sex 95% of the time for money. 31% of the time, so a third of the time that LGBTQ youth are participating in the street economy, they're doing it for shelter, for somewhere to sleep. 18% of the time, or every 5th time they're doing survival sex, participating in the street economy, they're doing it for food. 15% of the time they're doing it for drugs, and 11% of the time they're doing it for clothing. So I just want to reiterate, and sort of circling back to the narrative that I painted in the beginning of this conversation. I worked with the homeless kids. I saw this part of the trajectory. And now the reason that I do the work I do within the foster care and juvenile justice settings, and the reason that I have these conversations as much as I can, is I don't want any LGBTQ kid who gets rejected by their family or anyone else to end up in this situation. I call this the unfortunate trajectory. And so what I would ask you to think about when it comes to this unfortunate trajectory is that these are children. So do you have a kid in your life, maybe your own, who's 15 years old, a niece or a nephew, a grandchild, a cousin, a younger sibling? Do you have a kid in your life? And can you imagine, if you close your eyes for a second and think about that kid that you love so dearly going through the unfortunate trajectory, from a place where they're at home with their family to a place where they're trading sex for food on the street? Because that's what happens when we have a rejecting culture, when we have a rejecting family, when we have systems that are not prepared to scoop these kids up and help them, support them. This is what happens. And this is what was happening in the 80s. This is what was happening in the 40s. This is what's happening today in the 2020s. This is still happening. And so I cannot stress enough the importance of being affirming, which we will get to in just a second. There's just one other term I want to make sure we have, and it's a big one and it's an important one, and I think it meets the moment that we're in as a country right now, as a culture. And that term is intersectionality. You've probably heard this term. It refers to someone who experiences 2 layers of oppression at the same time. So for example, its original use was crafted by Kimberly Crenshaw in 1989, and it was used to define the experience of a Black woman. A woman intrinsically in our society is marginalized. A Black person intrinsically in our society is marginalized. A Black woman is duly marginalized for each of those identities. Intersectionality is at play. The work that I do in this world, what I think is really important to think of for intersectionality is that the research shows that by and large, these youth that I just described are all Black and brown. I can say at the Ali Forney Center when I worked there, 90% of the kids that we saw were Black and brown kids, 10% were white. So 9 out of 10 children are not only experiencing homelessness, active homelessness, and participating in the street economy, they're also navigating the fact that they are also brown or Black. They might be undocumented. They might speak Spanish as a first language or something else as a first language, not English. So intersectionality is vital when we do this work. We cannot come at this colorblind. We have to be aware that the youth that are experiencing this, by and large, are youth of color. And so let's get to our question and answer time for the research and the unfortunate trajectory. Elizabeth, do we have anything?
Yes, we do. We had a question about employment protections. Do you feel that lack of employment protections until very recently, I think that's in reference to the Bostock Supreme Court case, do you feel that lack of employment protections plays a role in trans youth participating in the street economy?
Absolutely. And I feel that way for a couple of reasons. First of all, excellent point, Elizabeth, about the Supreme Court case that recently happened. For those of you who don't know, just about 2 months ago, the Supreme Court ruled, and this is gonna sound crazy to you, like I'm not speaking the truth, but I am. Until about 2 months ago, in 25 states across America, you could be fired for coming out at your job. So for example, when marriage equality passed in 2015 nationally, there were people who went out and got married over the weekend because of that, maybe married to their lifelong partner, a wife of 30 years or a partner, a boyfriend of 25 years. They went to work on Monday, they told a coworker that they got married over the weekend, they were fired by the end of the week. That was a very real, very commonplace thing that was happening. And only just 2 months ago was that protection granted against that kind of discrimination. So yes, I do think that that is one of the reasons that trans youth choose not to participate in a gig economy or in the normal workforce, quote unquote normal workforce, because of that discrimination. Both because it's coming from people, but even now that it's a protected situation, that doesn't mean that in everyday interaction that child feels protected. So they may participate in the street economy because of that. But I would say more often they're participating in the street economy because they've never been given the keys, the soft and hard skills that they need in order to participate in what we would call the regular workforce. They also, if we're talking about a teen or a tween who ran away from home, they probably don't have a high school diploma. They probably don't have a college degree. They probably don't have a first job. Their first job may be participating in the street economy. And I think we all know when we're working with young people, if they don't have those basic skills, if they don't have those basic relationships built, they don't have those commodities like a resume, like how to talk during an interview, all of those things inhibit their ability to participate in the traditional workforce. But I do think discrimination plays a huge part of it. And I would also say there's a chilling effect that happens. So maybe they don't go to the street economy first. Maybe they go to every gap in their community and they apply for a job. Maybe they apply for a job at every McDonald's, every other fast food chain, every department store, and they don't get hired. And they don't get hired because they don't have a diploma. They don't get hired because they aren't polished. They haven't been taught how to get a job. After enough times of that, they're gonna give up because they're trying to get that job, and currently their minimum wage is $7.25 an hour. If you're in New York City, it's gonna be $15 an hour, which is great. But on the street economy, even though it's not the ideal situation, they might make $1,000 a day. And so they choose that instead of being in a work environment that may be rife with discrimination. So I do think it plays a part, and I do think it will eventually have a positive, it has a positive effect already that ruling happened. I think we will see in time how those practices change. But I also think that even with all of the acceptance in the world, the street economy will still exist out there, as long as there are families who are rejecting their kids' identities. Other questions?
That's it for now. We had that earlier question that we're still going to get to.
Absolutely.
Oh, actually, someone just sent in a question as I was speaking.
Great.
The question and statement is, I have a beloved transgender daughter who didn't really come out until age 22 a few years ago. She did not know she was transgender until in college. Is this unusual to not realize until later on?
First of all, awesome parent. Thank you for being affirming and supporting of your kid. Your trans daughter needs that. And you're modeling it wonderfully for anyone in your life who sees you doing that. It's not uncommon. And here's why. I'm going to circle back to what I said about society and growing up. And some trans kids speak up immediately. And that also is some kids in general speak up about their identity, not just LGBTQ identity, but any facet of themselves quickly. Some people, some youth are extroverts. I was walking around talking about myself all of the time as a little kid. So some trans kids might have that personality type and they're going to say it right off the bat. Other trans kids, and I'm not saying this is or isn't the case for your daughter, obviously, but other trans kids may see societally, well, I'm not supposed to like girls' toys. I'm not supposed to go to that part of the toy section in the store. I'm not supposed to want to wear a dress. I'm not supposed to want to have short hair and be called a boy's name because no one else is. And you learn, and in social work world, we call that internalized oppression. We tell ourselves that it's not real and we just sort of hide it. I'll say I was raised in that very small town in a very deeply religious environment. And I didn't know I was gay until I was 17 years old. And it was literally because it was the first time that it even crossed my mind that that was possible. I had just written off my feelings as just sort of a defect. So it's important to remember, and I can't stress this enough, kids don't know what it means to be LGBTQ either until they are taught that. They just know they have feelings. I just know that I stole my cousin Sarah's Barbies all of the time. I loved her Barbies and I knew I wanted to steal them and I knew I couldn't ask my parents to buy me them. I had to steal them from her. You know, so we all as children do what we have to do to cope. And sometimes that means that we even hide it from ourselves. So not uncommon at all. We're going to have a Q&A section at the end, and I just want to make sure we get to this awesome part at the end where we really are learning these skills. The last sad thing I'm going to say to you, I promise, it's the last sad, devastating thing I'm going to say. Queer youth suicide risk is incredibly high, incredibly high. So currently, regardless of sexual orientation or gender identity, young people, suicide is the second leading cause of death in teens in America today, right now. And that's the first time that it's been that. So suicide in general, if you work with young people, is, I'm sure, something that you're navigating or thinking about or you've had conversations about. But for LGBTQ kids, the risk is higher. So sexual orientation diverse people like myself are nearly 3 times as likely to be suicidal than their straight counterparts. Transgender kids are 4 or more times likely to be suicidal. And in a lot of different research areas, the school research I talked about with GLSEN, there's also an excellent organization called the Trevor Project that works with LGBTQ youth who are experiencing suicidal thoughts, has shown that up to 40% of trans people aren't suicidal or haven't had thoughts, but that they have actually actively attempted suicide. When I was working for the Ali Forney Center, one of the devastating things that I had to type over and over again, I was doing grant writing with them and I had to say it out loud a lot, is that in 1 year of data collection, 1 year of intake at that space, and they work with homeless LGBTQ youth, They see, I think, 1,000 unique youth a year coming into that space. And the year that I was there, 37% had said at intake, I've already attempted to take my life. And so there's two factors there that make that number higher than 37%. First of all, there are a lot of kids who may have already felt that way or had that experience, but didn't say it out loud, because that's a huge thing to admit to a stranger. In a situation you're already not the person in power, you're the homeless kid sitting there. You may not want to say it. So there's that. So it's probably higher than 37% because of all those kids who didn't want to say it. And then the other devastating fact is it would have been higher than 37% if all the kids who were successful at completing their suicide attempt weren't. And instead of being successful and buried, they were unsuccessful and doing intake at a program. So I will personally say all of the work that I do every day is to reduce this number. I don't think it's acceptable to live in a society where any population of children thinks that suicide is the best solution to their problems. We as adults have to do better. So how do we do better? Well, super exciting news, guys. Last year, the Trevor Project, the same organization that does work with LGBTQ youth who are experiencing suicidal thoughts, did research and came out with a report that one affirming adult, so let's go all the way back to the beginning when I said we're talking about saying, oh, you want me to call you Andrew now instead of Andrea? You got it, kid. I'll call you Andrew and he, him pronouns. Absolutely, I support you. If you're the person who asked the question, who is openly acknowledging having a trans daughter and supporting her, that is being affirming. By doing that behavior, you listener out there, but also any adult listening to this, any person, you are reducing that risk of suicide by 40%. So yes, you have a superpower right now, and that is that you can treat every LGBTQ kid and person you meet with respect by affirming them, by saying, I'll call you what you want me to call you. I support you. It doesn't matter to me who you're with. I support it. You're a superhero because you're helping reduce risk of suicide. So you may be asking yourself, much like the people who asked those questions earlier, what can I do to be more LGBTQ affirming? So we're going to talk about a couple of different ways, some strategies that you can use. We're going to talk about visual cues. We're going to talk about how to be an educated ally and just some tips in general with language to use. So back in the time where we all lived in an office space and we drove to work, having a physical space around us that is LGBTQ affirming is incredibly important. It's nonverbal support. I cannot stress enough how important the phrase nonverbal support is. If you go back to thinking about that questioning phase, and again, I'll use myself as an example. When I realized I was gay, I was 17. It was a year before I came out to anybody for a lot of reasons. One of those reasons was I didn't ever walk into a room and see a safe space sign or a rainbow sticker. I didn't have an adult in my life who wore an equals sign from HRC t-shirt or had a bumper sticker on their car that said, I love my gay son. I didn't see anything like that. And because I didn't see it, I certainly wasn't going to say anything. So if we can have visual cues like a rainbow sticker by using pride swag, what do I mean by pride? I always have some on hand. So for example, by pride swag, I might mean that you have some kind of sticker like this that is LGBTQ affirming, that shows that you are. You might have, another example, I have this little thing on my phone, right? It's simple, it's a little gesture, but if I were myself 20 years ago, and I saw someone with this cell phone, not that cell phones existed the way that they do now, 20 years ago, I would have been like, ooh, okay. Mental note, when I'm ready to talk about it, that's the person. That's the person I'm gonna come out to. At Pride, if you go to Pride events, you'll see there's everyone selling t-shirts. People are selling grocery bags or totes, lapel pins, all sorts of different ways to show that they are LGBTQ affirming. Yes, it's cool and colorful and fun, but it also serves an instrumental purpose in the safety of affirming the LGBTQ people in your life. Another really fun one for anyone who watches RuPaul's Drag Race or just loves drag queens. And I mean, who doesn't? They're pretty amazing. Drag queens are amazing to watch. I love it. I loved doing that. A lot of drag queens now sell their own merchandise. So if you have a drag queen you love from RuPaul's Drag Race, you can go to their website or go to their Facebook page, and they're often selling merch. So if you're walking around with a Bob the Drag Queen purse, or you're walking around with a Bianca Del Rio t-shirt, some LGBTQ kid might see that and go, okay, that's a cool adult, and that's someone that I know supports the community, and I can talk to them. So that's how we change our physical environment. The bumper sticker, like I had said before, it's how we're changing our physical space in order to convey this support. Now, let's talk about virtual space, because we're all operating in virtual space right now. All of you are in my living room currently, but you're seeing my green screen, right? So in this virtual space, a simple nonverbal means of support could be the background, like the one that I have. It's for my business, The Proud Path. It has rainbows all over it, and LGBTQ people, same-sex couples kissing, hearts, like all sorts of different ways that I'm conveying in this background that I am LGBTQ affirming and supportive. But also, you can use a virtual background. So these four backgrounds that you see here to the right, that's a screen capture. The Human Rights Campaign has these virtual backgrounds. You can Google Human Rights Campaign virtual background, or you can just Google rainbow or LGBTQ virtual background. There are a lot of them now. And if you're using Zoom, as you must be if you're watching this, or if you're on YouTube watching it live, hi to you there. But if you're using Zoom or any other platform like that, many of them have the option to put a virtual background in. And the Human Rights Campaign has created backgrounds that convey LGBTQ support right off the bat. You can also have a pride image like I do as the background. Oh, and the first bullet point, I'm sorry, I misread my own slide, is that you can have a rainbow object in the background. So if it is your personal living room that is being seen, then you could happen to have a rainbow vase. You could happen to have a mug or a t-shirt on or a sticker, just anything in the background that is LGBTQ affirming. And again, it is to non-verbally convey that support. It's incredibly important. So here's a fun, really easy way to continue to be an awesome and supportive ally. And that is current events. What's happening in the world? Elizabeth, it conveys to me, not that I know Elizabeth's identity, but Elizabeth conveys to me as an ally, or comes across that way, because she knows that just 2 months ago, a groundbreaking Supreme Court case provided protection for LGBTQ people nationwide from employment discrimination. The queer people in your life probably know about it because it's a big deal. So if you know about it and then you bring it up and you say, maybe you're spending time around a family member or a kid that you know identifies, and you might say, oh, did you guys hear about that court case? It's wild to me that LGBTQ people could have been fired for just coming out at work. That is discrimination. If you know that fact, then you're coming across as an ally because you care enough to know and you support the cause. So that discrimination case was on the slide before Elizabeth said it. She queued me up perfectly. Another one, and this is as a millennial who loves Harry Potter, this is an unfortunate one. But right now it appears that J.K. Rowling, the woman who wrote Harry Potter, that entire series, is what's called a TERF, a trans-exclusive radical feminist. So a TERF, if you haven't heard this term before, is essentially a feminist who does not believe that transgender women are a part of the women's community. They view trans women and the rights that trans women are trying to secure for themselves as taking away from the feminist cause, because in their mind, they only see women who are identified female at birth as being authentically real women, deserving of that kind of support. everyone that I know who is my age, who loved Harry Potter growing up, is a little devastated by it, because it's really difficult to know that this person who changed the world with this incredible story, a story about being different, about being a child who's different, unfortunately seems to support this cause. Also, you may not know this, but men who have ever had sex with men are prohibited from donating blood, or were prohibited from donating blood entirely until about a year ago. But a year ago, it was changed to if you've been celibate for over a year. So for example, as a married man, I have to tell them when I'm going to donate blood, which I've never been legally allowed to do, that I have been celibate for a year before I'm allowed to donate blood. It is such an embarrassing and deeply invasive thing to discuss when you're trying to be a person who's helping out society by donating blood. And so if you know, as an ally, about these topics, and guess what? You know, because we just talked about them. Now that you know, when you bring these things up, you're creating an environment that is LGBTQ affirming. You're creating a conversation, a mood, a moment, a space that is intrinsically centered around LGBTQ people and shows that you care enough to know. So when you do that, you're conveying allyship, and we hear it and we see it and we love it and we thank you for it. I thank you for it. So last piece before we get to some question and answer time, what we say matters. So just be aware of our language. We do it a lot. We as people, we have no idea all the ways in which we do this. For example, I have this woman who's helping me out with my work at the state position right now. And I consistently thought of her literally as my right-hand man. And then I said it out loud one time and I was like, oh my God, that is sexist. I'm so sorry. Because I was saying right-hand man to a woman who was being my supporter, right? But that's baked into our language and culture. So we say things like, how many man hours or how much manpower is it gonna take? We talk about damsels in distress or someone being a little lady, or we talk about a little boy being a ladies' man, as if it's great that a little boy is gonna just like be like, all the girls are gonna be smitten by this little boy, right? Well, we're placing on that little boy a whole lot of expectation around a lot of things, who he's attracted to for one, that set him up to feel as though if he doesn't want to be a ladies' man, but wants to maybe be more of a gentleman's man, if you know what I'm saying, then he has to talk about that. Then that's not baked into the language, right? So we do this, I do this all of the time. So it's important that we assess the language that we use. It's vital that we acknowledge that there's gender bias in society. If you don't believe me, when this is over, go to Google, type in girls' toys, look at all the things you see. Type in boys' toys, look at all the things you see. I will tell you on the Proud Path, I've got a course around this where I talk about gender and gender expectations, where I do exactly that. And I will tell you, the results are often this: girls' toys, girls' soap, girls' anything. It's gonna be pink. It's gonna smell like flowers or perfume. It's gonna be dainty. It's gonna be curvy. So if you think about like women's razors and how they're even hourglass shaped, the handle of the razor, because they're trying to market and target to women, even though it does the same thing as the stainless steel, strong, black, silver, dark blue, 70,000 blades, titanium steel men's razor, right? It's baked in, it's advertising 101. There's actually studies that have been done and research, and there was even a lawsuit about the carpet inside of a Toys R Us, because the carpet was covertly messaging to children where they should go, because that's what they see. They're looking down and they see the carpet, and it was pushing them in a gender direction. Oh, you're a little boy. We're gonna pepper in some blue dots, some army soldier figures, some science STEM things because boys are better at math, and we're going to push you in that direction. Oh, you're a girl, we're going to have hearts and flowers and princesses, and we're going to push you in that direction. So we have this gender bias in our society. It's expectation that kids learn, they pick up on very quickly. To circle back to the question about living in a society where kids don't have to come out, as long as gender bias in these ways exist, as long as Googling girls' toy gives you a very, very, very different response than boys' toy, we're going to have to come out because we're fighting against the stereotypes that are being placed on us. And another important language thing that we've already covered is pronouns. So I'm not transgender. Why do I have my pronouns in my signature for my email? Why do I have them listed on my Zoom window right now? Because it is exhausting to be the only LGBTQ person in a space who uses different pronouns. So it's not really fair to force only people who use different pronouns to tell everyone about different pronouns. It's a really overt, simple method of conveying affirming support when you just drop your pronouns into your signature, when you introduce yourself with them. You're telling the people around you that you get it and you support. Now, real quick, I want to make sure we have at least a minute for a question or two. We're all gonna make mistakes. I make mistakes. I once worked in a school, private school, where there were 2 students who used they, them pronouns, and those 2 students got into a fight. And I had to talk to them, both of them, about the fact that they, one of them, hurt the other one, their feelings, the other one, right? Like, it's difficult. I'm not saying this is easy. We make mistakes. So when you do, when I do, it's okay. But what we need to do is correct it and move on. So why did he, oh, I'm sorry, that's right. I meant to say, why did they do this? Oh, I didn't know she went by Crystal now. Thank you for telling me. That's all you have to do. I don't know that term. So going back to the idea of agender versus non-binary and how someone might identify that and that they have similar but maybe different definitions. If a kid says that to you, the easiest thing and the most affirming thing you can do is just say, you know, I actually don't know that term, or the way I understand it is different. Can you help me understand what it means to you? We're speaking to the person that's in front of us and letting them define it. And then it's okay if you hear someone using the wrong pronoun to say, oh, actually, Zane uses he, him pronouns now. So just so you know, so use those moving forward, right? It's not a big deal. It's gonna happen. It always happens. It's okay. So what are the big takeaways here? We are believing youth when they tell us who they are. Queer youth need more support to avoid suicide risk. Do not let ignorance stand in the way of progress. It's okay to say you don't know. And finally, this is uncomfortable, difficult, lifelong work, but I promise you that you can do it. All right? So with a couple of minutes left, I just want to open it up to any final questions we've got.
Amazing. So we have a couple of quick comments from folks I wanted to share with everyone since they were in the Q&A chat box. We had 2 people point out that girls and women's products tend to cost more due to the pink tax. Thanks to both of you for being on the same page. We had someone point out that two people pointed out how to have affirming accessories. One person said if you own an Apple Watch, Apple Watches have rainbow flag clock faces that you can use.
Absolutely.
And then someone else said that they had never gotten more compliments from high schoolers than the day that they wore a Trixie Mattel shirt to do outreach in.
Yes.
And then
I'm so sorry to jump in here, everyone, but I just want to make sure that before we lose our closed captioning for the evening, Spirit set at an hour and a half, that I have a chance to thank you both. We do have a copy of the questions, so we'll be able to, I can send them to you, Nathaniel, to follow up if you wanted to sort of look through them. And I know that folks have your contact information through the slides, and I hate to have to cut this while we're in such a good conversation, but I just wanted to make sure that we didn't lose folks. So thank you so much for a wonderful conversation. Thank you, Elizabeth, for your time tonight. And thank you everyone for attending. We will see you all tomorrow at 11 or 11:30. It's been a long day, but we will see you all tomorrow for our next session. So thank you everyone so much and have a great rest of your night.
Thank you, everybody.